The circulatory system is different from the integumentary system, but both are involved in the healing of a wound. So in this lesson, we're going to talk about three things. So just like the integumentary system has three parts or three layers, the circulatory system has three parts. Fifth period, we ready? Okay. Three parts. It is made up of, number one, cells made by the bone marrow. Number two, plasma. And number three, blood vessels. Three components of the circulatory system that we have to be familiar with: cells, plasma, and blood vessels. Okay, so let's start with number one. So number one, the bone marrow. So if we start with the bone, inside of every single bone, we have something known as bone marrow. So it's this spongy substance in the middle of our bones. And if we were to zoom in, we would find a variety of things, but one of the major things that we would find are a specific type of cell. And that cell is known as a hematopoietic stem cell. So a hematopoietic stem cell found within the bone marrow. So a quick profile about these stem cells. So its function is that these stem cells can differentiate into all of the cell types in the blood. It has the potential to differentiate into all the cell types in the blood. For that reason, we call it a multipotent somatic stem cell. So it's somatic, not embryonic, and it's multipotent because it can give rise to a variety of cell types, but not all cell types. That's what's found inside of our bone marrow. Okay. So this cell can do two things. One, it can regenerate. In other words, make copies of itself. By mitosis, it can divide and just become more hematopoietic stem cells. But then it can also differentiate. Also known as specialize. And there's three things it can become. So one, it can become a white blood cell. Two, it can become a red blood cell. And 3, it can become a platelet. all three of these cell types, they're derived from the hematopoietic stem cell. Okay, so a quick profile about these. So white blood cells, their major purpose is that they fight and remember infection. So they have this ability to remember specific infections and be prepared for them next time. You'll also see that these white blood cells, they go by a fancier name. They're called either leukocytes or lymphocytes. Red blood cells, their major function is to carry oxygen and carbon dioxide throughout the body, to either be spread to other cells or released as waste. Their fancy name, they're known as erythrocytes. Erythrocytes. Okay. And lastly, the platelets. It doesn't have really a different name, but its major function is to help in the formation of blood clots. White blood cells, red blood cells, and platelets. Okay. So, what we're going to do is we're going to think of this in terms of where these are located. So once they're produced in the bone marrow, they get released into the blood, and they travel through blood vessels. So veins, arteries, capillaries, they're all vessels, tubes, through which blood flows. And if we were to take a cross-section of one of these tubes, what we would actually see is something like this. So there's actually cells that make up the lining of the tube that then become the blood vessel. Okay, so we know so far, blood vessels, that's what blood flows through. Inside of this, we'd expect to find white blood cells, red blood cells, and platelets. So I'm going to use, you can use whatever color you'd like, but for red blood cells, I'm going to use pink. Platelets, I'm going to use green. And white blood cells, I'm going to use gray. And you can draw a couple of these. Okay. So we have our 3 types of cells. But blood is not just cells. Blood also has a liquid. You can use whatever color you would like. So this liquid is called plasma. So the liquid in which the cells are dissolved in is called plasma. So this plasma, 3 major parts. This will be our last thing. So 3 major parts of plasma. Number 1, water. So most of your blood is made out of water. Number 2, salts. So we saw last sequence that there is fluoride in our blood. There's also sodium and other types of salts. And lastly, there are proteins. There are proteins that float around in our blood, like antibodies. And a lot of these proteins, they're made by the liver. So you have the bone marrow contributing to the blood, you have liver contributing to the blood. And blood is this mixture of plasma and cells. Okay. So on Friday, we're going to see how this circulatory system and the integumentary system are deeply linked together. And we're going to use these different components to think about how wounds heal. So we're going to pause right there.